This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The legacy and the future of the civil rights movement in Memphis, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We are joined tonight by Daphne McFerrin, Executive Director, Benjamin Hooks Institute for Social Change. Thanks for being here. Also Bill Dries, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And Beverly Robertson, President of the National Civil Rights Museum. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Beverly, we'll start. It is first, as we air the show, the anniversary of King's death, and you are also opening the museum, a major renovation to the National Civil Rights Museum. Let's start there and talk a little bit about why a renovation, why now, because it's more than just paint and touching things up. It's an expansion of the philosophy of the museum. It's expansion of a lot of things. So let's start there.
Well, many people have wondered why we decided to renovate the museum. Technically, we started this discussion about 8 to 10 years ago, because what I had done is I had done a competitive analysis of new museums, new history, civil rights museums that were entering the scene nationally, many of which were close by. There's a major one in Jackson, Mississippi under construction right now. There's a major museum in Nashville under construction. And we knew that we needed to freshen up. History has changed in the 20 years that we have existed, and we need to update history. It's not reflected on our walls. In addition to that, our technology that drives the exhibitry, folks couldn't fix it. It was 20 years old. Yeah. And so we had to totally change the technological infrastructure of the institution. In addition, we realized that people don't walk through a museum and experience it the same way today that they did 20 years ago. So we needed to make sure that it was more interactive, that there were more multi-touch, multi-user kinds of mechanisms in the museum, smart tables. There were more voices of everyday people there to inspire folks. So we changed that museum from top to bottom, while the content is still the same. The way that we deliver that content is different.
Daphne, again, on the anniversary and Hooks Institute and the newly renovated National Civil Rights Museum, the civil rights movement, I mean, to say the least, its role, talk a little bit about its role in Memphis, but it's also the National Civil Rights Museum. It's not just the history of, obviously, in any way, just the history in Memphis, but Memphis's role in that and its importance to Memphis and then to the country at large.
Well, what happens in the United States is, in Memphis is part of the United States and the world, and it's not isolated. What I find interesting is the movement in Memphis was connected and is connected to the other social justice movements in the nation. Dr. Hooks and Dr. King were friends, and they were also board members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was started by Dr. Hooks. Dr. King came to Memphis in the late 1950s, long before the Memphis sanitation worker strike, to look at the organizational skills and the social clubs and the civic groups of African Americans in Memphis as a model to use in other cities. And so the Hooks Institute's mission is teaching, studying, and promoting civil rights and social change. And I say, in essence, what that means is the Institute is a catalyst for change in the community. And it's a complement to organizations like the Civil Rights Museum, because our focus is in using the university or the academy to preserve the history of the civil rights movement, but also to be progressive in looking at what research, what community activities can result in improving the conditions of people who still suffer from the same disparities that Dr. King and Dr. Hooks tried to address in their lifetimes.
Because it is, I mean, for the museum and then for the work you do, I mean, the museum is at once captures this history, but unlike, say, the history of American Revolution or something, that's done. American history isn't done, but that event is done. The civil rights movement was a movement in time, but like you're saying, there's still work to be done. And so I guess I'll switch back to you, the role of the museum in terms of present day issues of civil rights.
One of the reasons that we thought it was also important to renovate is because you have to connect the dots. Many times young people, when you talk to them about history, civil rights history, American history, they say those were the olden days. We don't do that stuff anymore. Those issues don't occur right now. But the reality is the history informs the present, and it leads us into the future. So what we wanted to do was, for example, in Brown versus Board of Education, we wanted to help people to understand some of the things that are going on in Memphis and in the world even today as it relates to school desegregation, which was promoted by the legislation, Brown v. Board of Education. Things are happening in Memphis today that's still connected to that. And when you look at that, there will be things that will be happening on an ongoing basis. So we literally have boards in that gallery that allow us to publish things that happened right now and things that speak to the future. So we've connected the past to the present to the future. And we've done that in our last film, which is called the Ellipsis film, where we talk about and salute the achievements of those who came before us. But we show 3 young people located all across this country who are carrying on relative to contemporary civil rights issue. Human trafficking is a major one. We feature an individual who deals with that. Yeah. Technology for young people, they deal with that. Immigration. These are young people that are walking in the footsteps, but doing it around issues that are relevant to everyone today.
Yeah. Bill.
Part of the work of the Institute involves not only Dr. Hooks's papers, but the stories that he told so many times of the movement. And I think part of the Institute's work has been transcribing some audio tapes of him just basically telling the stories of the movement and his involvement in it, and about his life in a Memphis that now seems in some ways such a long time ago, but in other ways seems as relevant as yesterday. Talk about that a bit.
I think that one of the great things about our country is how quickly things can change in a lifetime. There's much work to be done, but it also shows that people like Hooks, my parents were civil rights activists out of Fayette County, and other national leaders use their lifetimes to create a whole different country. And I tell people when they ask me, well, why is the civil rights movement relevant to today? And I said, you know, America exports. We export products, cars, widgets, etc. We also export our values to other countries. And I had an example of that when I was in Germany in January 2013, when I was interacting with Germans, and they knew in detail American civil rights history, and the American embassy was focused on American civil rights history. In the Arab Spring, there was an exhibit now at the Pink Palace that in the Arab Spring, young men in those countries in Egypt were holding up signs in Arabic saying, "I am a man." And that's out of Memphis. So these are recent events. So the movement still impacts America and the world today. So Dr. Hooks' story is important. We have not only memorialized his work and have his collection of materials, his personal papers which span his life practically as a lawyer, minister, judge, in special collections at the University of Memphis. And in case you want to come take a look at his 397 boxes of materials. Okay. So we're getting ready to digitize a portion of that collection. In addition, we have created a film on his life called Duty of the Hour. And a trailer of the film is on the Hooks Institute's website. So one of the things that people don't know about Dr. Hooks, and he's an American Horatio Alger story, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, is that people don't realize he came from a hardworking family with the studio on Beale Street, but Dr. Hooks' family lived in Foote Homes, which is on Vance Avenue. Those homes were built existing anyway in the 20s and 30s, and Dr. Hooks' family suffered from the Depression, and he lived in public housing. Dr. Hooks went to law school on the GI Bill because his family couldn't afford to send him to law school. And then from there, he came back to Memphis because he wanted to make a difference in the life of the city. So for young people today, it's important that they understand the sacrifices other people have made coming before them. And the life of Dr. Hooks is relevant to every young person today. Minority youth are disproportionately unemployed in this country today. And the Pew Center, which is shocking, says that if you are unemployed in your teenage years, even with a part-time job, it affects your earning potential as an adult. So we have some issues to address that deal with sort of historic issues of how people perform. And I tell people, I have to give them real stories to sort of make it real. I say my mother grew up in Benton County, Mississippi, which didn't have a high school for blacks who wanted to go beyond 8th grade. And I said, so I am the first generation that didn't have to leave the county to go to high school. So it's like being malnourished when you're a child. It takes a while to overcome those deficiencies. So our country has made great strides in areas dealing with civil rights and equality. But the Civil Rights Museum, the Hooks Institute, wants people and encourages our public elected officials and community to question sort of what can we do to keep advancing the ball.
Well, and as part of that, we had Mayor Wharton on the show in the last few weeks, and we talked about a whole range of things, and taxes and pensions and all that. But towards the end, there's an initiative that Obama started that he's following in about having this conversation about, and you touched on it, the notion of young black men. And I think I'm going to paraphrase Mayor Wharton. He said, young black boys are killing each other. And it's a problem we have to start talking about. We can't avoid that fact. And is that part of the movement or the conversation that it's not about villainizing these kids because they're black. It's about identifying what's going on with this demographic of people, and then also identifying the legacy. But is that part of us coming farther, that we can have a calm conversation about that, not a fiery conversation about it?
I think we can have a calm conversation about that, but I think we also have to act. We can't just talk about it. And when I talk about action, I'm really talking about doing some things that will give these young men hope. I think part of this is this sense of hopelessness coupled with the sense that they can make money fast. Because they're looking at TV, they're looking at basketball players, they're looking at rap stars, and they're thinking, well, I ought to be able to make money fast, and I want money fast. And if they can't make it fast, they don't see a way to do that. They don't have the hope that they might be able to accomplish it. They may turn to other means, so they'll redeploy their thinking from going to school, getting an education, because that takes a lot longer. I want immediate gratification. That's a bit of the culture that's been created by what they see on TV, by what they see around them. So I think one of the things that we have all got to do is not just talk about it, but we need to act. Each one of us has a role to play. We can go over to Foot Homes and identify a child and adopt a young brother out here and see if we can't begin to expose them to a different life. If they see it, if they're around it, if you teach them, if you speak it into them, they will eventually get inspired. They need to see other black men doing things with them, or other men, period, who care about them. You can be white, but you can care about them. Give them some hope. And let me tell you, these kids are smart. My husband and I have adopted several young black men from Foot Homes over the years. And guess what? One of them graduated from Morehouse and has a really good job in Atlanta. The other one graduated from Lane College, and he is doing well in Memphis, Tennessee. So what I'm saying is they're not bad kids. It's all about what they're exposed to. It's all about somebody just thinking enough about them to want to do something for them. And each of us, everybody in Memphis, Tennessee, can do just that.
As each of your institutions work and document the framework of the movement as we knew it in the 60s and into the early 70s, then it seems to me as if when I look at it, that framework was so basic because it had to be, because the oppression was so overwhelming that people in the movement faced, that was literally all that they had to affect social change. Is that the key to the durability of it, that it was built on basic human relationships, basic interaction between people?
Is that the key to durability? I think circumstances have changed. The family unit is different now than it was 40 or 50 years ago, particularly as it relates to driving change in our community. It's a little bit more complex, although I think the solutions have to be simple, but I think you have to deal with the complexity of the issues. And I think in doing that, I think you have to collaborate. We have to look at how do we really minimize and reduce poverty, because people can't pay attention if they can't eat. People can't pay attention if they don't have somebody in the home that is looking after their basic needs. So we need to begin to address that. Once you begin to address the issue of poverty, and then you address the issue of education, it is a mindset change. But the solutions have to be simple, and like Daphne said, you tell a story and people get it. It has to be in terms that resonate with the target audience that you're approaching.
And you talk maybe about poverty. You know, poverty is not exclusively people of color.
No, absolutely not.
We had somebody on the show talking about Medicaid, a political thing, the Medicaid expansion, all that. And to whoever it was pointed out that, I mean, the majority of people eligible for Medicaid in Tennessee are something like 40 or 50-year-old white men.
Absolutely.
Stuck in poverty. And it's generational poverty. And so is that part of expanding the mission of social change?
Poverty has always been an issue of civil rights. When Dr. Hooks was, when Dr. King was assassinated, he was taking on the war on poverty through the Poor People's Campaign. And just going back to the question of are there simple solutions, I'd like to point out that the Civil Rights Museum, what we call the modern movement, which we associate with Dr. King, the 1950s moving forward, that's the modern movement, but that movement to abolish slavery and mistreatment of blacks, which we call the long history of the civil rights movement, began 200 to 300 years before the civil rights movement began. Yeah. So it didn't happen overnight. There were abolitionists who were working hard in the 1800s. In 1909, the NAACP was formed in Niagara Falls. W.E.B. Du Bois, there are lots of people leading up to Dr. King. And Dr. King was also influenced by Gandhi in another country. So when we talk about current issues of current poverty, they're not going to be resolved overnight because they didn't occur overnight. And you're right, there are more poor white people in the United States than black people, but unfortunately, black people disproportionately are in poverty when you look at the numbers. So to address these issues, we have to first, I think, conclude that we don't have anybody in our communities we can lose, that everyone's valuable. Secondly, with respect to the issue, and I'm doing a very narrow issue here, with respect to black men, we have to realize that both black and white men form the foundation. You know, women do too, but men form the foundation of our communities. And if you lose 50%, and that's, when you lose your males, especially in the black American community, you destabilize the communities. Also, we have to understand that not everyone has the tools to understand how to get out of poverty. Right. That some of the things that we assume being middle-class people is because we live this life and unconsciously or through our network of friends know how to navigate and create friendships, wealth, maintain jobs. But if you're in poverty and you don't have access to those tools, then it creates generational poverty.
Right. I mean, isn't a lot of that education? Like, I mean, I just tell a personal story, which is my grandfather on the Barnside my father grew up on welfare, I mean, and people, if I say that to somebody, they're like, what, huh, what? I went to college and graduate school and all that. My father got out through, you mentioned the GI Bill, he escaped that cycle through education, and then he passes it along to his children and I to my children. So you mentioned schools before. Is that, I mean, on some level where it starts?
Well, I think it actually starts, let me go back to when I grew up. It started in my home. It started with my parents. And it started with them being working class citizens who really provided and who really reinforced the value of education and told us, you can do anything, but you got to get educated first. You can't just go out there and do it. So education is a fundamental piece of it. But I do think that in most communities, you have, in most ethnicities, there are two parents in the household. When one is gone and one is the bread earner, there's only one there, it makes it very difficult for those children to have the kind of reinforcement, to meet their basic needs, to do the things that they need to do to really just stay in school and focus on education. And there are lots of other variables that impact them. Yes, it is about education, but how do we get them to focus on understanding that this is indeed their way out?
Yeah, yeah. Bill.
You talked about the long arc of what we know as the civil rights movement. One of the things that I was most struck by in the renovated museum is one of the first areas that documents and outlines what the slave trade was about. What I found most striking is that in this section there is a rotunda-like feature. I don't know the exact architectural term. And on it are the beginning words of the Declaration of Independence, and an exhibit about slavery before there was a Declaration of Independence and the origins of it. That, to me, tied much of this long arc together for me. That was a scope in the museum that I don't think existed in the initial plans in 1991.
Right.
When the museum opened.
Absolutely. That exhibit gallery also has the cutout of a slave ship and characters in the bottom of the slave ship. It has space so that individuals that are small enough can actually crouch down and feel the inhumanity of what it must have felt like to cross the Middle Passage in that state. And it also has a map of the world where people can actually walk the path of the slave trade. So it goes from Africa to the West Indies on to North America, and what you begin to realize is that enslaved people became commodities. They were traded for rum and tobacco and cotton and sugar. That means that the slave trade or enslaved people built the global economy. They were the global economy. They created Wall Street because they were exchanged for money. So a lot of people don't know a little bit of that history. In addition to that, there's this discussion and debate between the founding fathers who took different positions on slavery. Some were for it, some were against it. Usually the ones against it represented some of the southern states because that was their source of income. That drove their economy. So that exhibit is so powerful. There's an auction block where there's a mother and a baby and an auctioneer. And we do know that children were ripped from the arms of their mothers. So it really engages you in a visceral way and helps you to understand the early beginnings of this country. And I think that is really important because that's important before you go into the next gallery, which is about the film. So that first gallery takes you from slavery up to Reconstruction, and then the film takes you through Reconstruction up to Jim Crow.
As we get further from the 60s and the 70s in terms of time, you talk about history changing. We know things now that we didn't know then, even about those events that were only 50, 60 years ago. Some of it we know because of the government surveillance of Dr. King and other people in the movement. It adds value, obviously, to what we know. But in the case of the Hooks Institute for Social Change, are there mixed feelings about having that information available about the movement now to better define it, even though it was not gathered for those purposes?
Well, I mean, first of all, we are open society, okay, and I take issue. I don't know why people would think Dr. King would have to be perfect in character, that he has to be examined under a microscope for us to acknowledge the great leadership he provided this nation. And he sacrificed his life and created changes that were sweeping and transformative and studied by every country on this planet. And I think the focus on people's personal lives, even today, is sometimes too intrusive and often unwarranted. So if anything, it shows, yes, it does show that he had character flaws, but the greatness that he had despite those character flaws. It also says something about how we should monitor our government. And that's a contemporary issue, as you know, with NSA surveillance. So it's important to have these open records so that we examine the people who are being examined as well as the people who are doing the examining. And so that's important. It's also important to do what the Hooks Institute and the National Civil Rights Museum is doing in preserving this history, but not lose sight of the fact that the reason we are here is to advance the ball. Mm-hmm. And so one way of doing it, that Beverly is doing it through the Civil Rights Museum, is to engage people in thought about how they can create change. The Hooks Institute is doing it, trying to meet people where they are in this age of media by creating documentaries, as I said, on Dr. Hooks. The Memphis 13 that was funded in part by the Hooks Institute, which looks at the first 13 students who desegregated Memphis City schools and how they felt about that experience. Freedom's Frontline, Fayette County, Tennessee, which has been aired about 5 years by this station. So to look at that, we also are engaging the community now on issues that we believe came out of the movement, disparities. So for example, minority and African American youth have the highest drowning rates in this nation. So the Hooks Institute, in conjunction with Splash Mid-South, the city of Memphis, and the YMCA, have this program called Splash Mid-South, where we teach minority children water safety instruction. So since that program started in 2008, we've had 5,000 children complete the water safety instruction program and another 1,000 on the waiting list.
Yeah, we have just a minute left. That's interesting. You're retiring. Just a moment. So after 17 years?
I am, after 17 years.
Well, I guess you get through the renovation. Why now? Why retire now?
Well, I think to all things, a season. And I think I've had my season. I've been through 2 major renovations, an $11 million renovation, and now a $40 million comprehensive campaign. We've got a new National Civil Rights Museum that is positioned for world-class greatness, to do lots of things, to educate lots of people. And I just don't believe everybody ought to have a position for life. I'm not one to have a position for life. Politicians may, but not me.
Right.
So I think it's time.
All right. Well, I guess I will congratulate you on the renovation, a great career there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.